He thought she couldn't speak. A nobleman with no heir, a girl left in reeds like a forgotten offering. But when danger closed in, she opened her mouth and whispered the name of the only man who ever showed her mercy. The wind off the river was sharp, not with cold but with something stranger, like the breath of something ancient that had forgotten how to sleep. Men in linen cloaks spoke in hushed tones near the docks, their baskets full of fish and news. But high above them, beyond the reed huts and smoky lamps, in a stone courtyard quiet with dust and memory, a man stood alone at the edge of the balustrade. His name was Herk. He was noble by birth, soldier by duty, but neither title had brought him much peace. His estate was large, nestled between the hills where the Nile curved gently as if in deference to the gods, but his halls were silent. The years had left him with land, servants, and silver, but no son, no wife, no voice in the echo of his own lineage. His enemies called him cold, his allies distant. And even the servants who scrubbed the alabaster floors knew better than to speak to him, unless spoken to first. But that morning, something strange pulled him from his usual routine. It was the birds, perhaps. They scattered too fast from the reeds, wings cutting hard against the morning air. Or maybe it was the old dog that refused to drink at the water's edge. But when Herk's steward approached, panting and pale from running, the nobleman already had his sandals on, already striding toward the bank with long, determined steps. "They say there's something in the basket, my lord," the steward said breathlessly. "The one floating just west of the pillar stones. It's caught in the reeds now. No one will touch it." Herk said nothing. He moved faster. When he reached the embankment, the workers stepped back. Their eyes didn't rise to meet his. A few pointed, muttering behind calloused hands, and there it was, a woven basket bobbing gently, caught in the thick tangle of reeds near the shore. He could see the linen wrap inside, something small tucked beneath folds of damp cloth. The air felt suddenly too still. He didn't wait for help. Herk stepped knee-deep into the Nile, the cold biting through his robes. His fingers closed around the basket's edge and drew it close. The reeds scratched his skin, but he barely felt them. He lifted the bundle carefully, cradling it against his chest as he trudged back to land. It wasn't until he was away from the river, standing beneath the shade of the sycamore trees, that he pulled the linen back fully and saw the child. She was tiny, not an infant but not yet a toddler, perhaps 2 years at most. Her hair was thick and dark, stuck to her forehead from dampness. Her eyes were open, wide and unblinking, not in fear, but something closer to knowing. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she only stared straight at him. And she did not make a sound. "Fetch the midwife," Herk said quietly, "and summon Kari now." Kari arrived just before the sun reached its peak. He was older than Herk by a decade, his back bowed from years over scrolls, but his mind remained sharp. As Herk's steward and closest confidant, he had once kept track of everything from palace letters to inheritance disputes. He also knew when not to speak. "She's mute," the midwife said later, frowning as she wiped her hands on a cloth. "Or too afraid to speak. Either way, I hear no sound from her. She's healthy enough, no bruising, no sickness, but she will not talk." Herk stared at the child, now bundled in dry cloth on a padded seat near the fire. She looked at him again, still no expression, still that steady, unreadable gaze. "She's not from any of the villages near here," Kari added. "None of the fisherwomen or field hands have reported a missing child, and there was no name on the basket, no mark, nothing." "Someone didn't want her found," Herk said. "Or didn't want her to die." "She would have died." Kari didn't answer. Instead, he turned and left, giving his master the space he never asked for but always accepted. That night Herk could not sleep. He paced the courtyard as stars emerged one by one in the black velvet sky. In the chamber behind him, the girl lay curled on a low couch, her small chest rising and falling steadily. She still hadn't spoken, hadn't made a sound, not even when given honeyed bread or warm water. She only looked, and always at him. He tried to tell himself he would send her to the temple orphanage come morning. It was the right thing, the responsible choice. A nobleman with no wife could not raise a child, not without question, not without scandal. But when the jackals began howling in the distance and the wind shifted toward the river again, he stepped inside and drew the door closed behind him. The next morning she was still there. And so was he. 3 days passed. Then 7. And each time he left for the granaries, for the fish market, for the old priest's house, he came back to find her sitting in the exact same place, silent, still, watching. The servants began to whisper. Some said she was a spirit, others that she was cursed. A few believed she'd been offered to the Nile by desperate hands, meant as a plea to the gods, but Herc silenced them with a glance. The child was not a ghost, nor was she a plague. She was something else. He began calling her Nima. It was a name his mother had once whispered when speaking of stars, a word that meant silent blessing. Nima followed him everywhere. She never cried, never complained, but always watched. When he visited the scribe school, she sat beside him. When he walked the olive rows near the valley cliffs, she walked at his heel. She slept near his chamber doors, curled like a pup. No one knew what to make of her, but no one dared question it. Until the day the messenger arrived. He wore the pharaoh's crest. His horse was foamed with sweat. "A summons," he said, bowing low and extending a scroll. "For Lord Herc, keeper of the 2nd District, scholar of state decrees." Herc's brow tightened. The seal was unbroken. Inside the scroll were only 12 words. "You are to report within 3 days. Do not bring the girl." That night Herc didn't sleep again. He stood by the river where he had first found her, the wind rustling the reeds, the basket long since gone. Nima stood beside him, barefoot and still. She touched his hand once briefly, then let go. She understood something, of that he was certain. He left before dawn. He didn't say goodbye. Kari stayed behind to care for her. The servants kept their distance. The house felt wrong without him, but Nima didn't make a sound. Not when he rode off. Not when the jackals howled again. Not even when thunder cracked low over the valley. 2 nights passed. And on the 3rd, just before sunrise, Kari woke with a start to find the girl standing at the foot of his bed. Her lips moved. She spoke for the first time. She said one word. Just one. His name. Herc. Herc's return was not immediate. In fact, for 9 more days, Nima did not see the man who had plucked her from the reeds and given her a place by the fire. The estate grew quieter in his absence. The kitchen still lit its hearth. The steward still oversaw the storehouse ledgers, and the guards still patrolled at dusk, but it was as if the soul of the house had gone with him. Without Herc, the very walls seemed to hum in a different tone. Kari did what he could. He sat with Nima during the evening hours, reading aloud from old tales she could not yet understand, lighting the oil lamps she liked best, placing her food exactly how she liked it, each piece symmetrical, neat, predictable. But she never looked at him the way she looked at Herc. She wandered the halls barefoot, silent as ever. Only now she would sometimes pause at doors that weren't his and press her hand flat against the wood, listening. Once, Kari saw her stand by the threshold to Herc's chamber for nearly an hour without moving. Her small hand gripped the edge of the doorframe, her eyes locked on the empty mat where the nobleman usually rested after sunset. She didn't cry, but something in her face changed that night. The calm that once surrounded her now seemed like something forced, a quiet too practiced. When the 10th day came, she stopped eating altogether. Kari tried to coax her with honeyed barley cakes, with soft figs, even with bits of fish dried the way she liked. She refused them all. Her gaze grew more distant, her steps slower. And that night, when Kari found her not in the corner of his chamber but crouched beside Herc's empty sandals, her face turned toward the darkness, he knew something deeper was unraveling. But what he could not have known, Not then, was what Herc had found in the capital. The pharaoh's court was never known for kindness, but what waited for Herc behind those tall columns of polished white stone was colder than protocol. He had been summoned not as an honored noble, not even as a military figure, but as a witness, a petitioner, a man to be questioned. The scroll had said nothing of it, but he was brought not to a council chamber or a court of scrolls, but to a quiet side hall where a man waited in a robe too fine for a scribe and too plain for a priest. He had known the man once barely, a cousin to the pharaoh's general. He didn't speak right away. He only gestured for Herc to sit. "Tell me about the girl," the man said after a pause. "What girl?" "The one you pulled from the Nile." "She's nothing to the court." "She's everything to someone." Herc didn't answer. The man's face remained unreadable. "Did she speak?" "Not while I was there." "Not even a word?" "No." Another pause, then, "She is not yours." "I never said she was." "You kept her." "I fed her, clothed her, gave her shelter." "She is not a stray dog, Lord Herc. She is of blood, and blood remembers where it belongs." Herc's jaw tightened. "Whose blood?" But the man did not answer. Instead, he reached into the folds of his robe and withdrew something. A strip of linen, frayed, aged, but with a single symbol painted in deep blue across its middle, a jackal poised above a broken reed. Herc recognized it instantly. He had seen it once, on a banner carried by soldiers who passed his estate 4 years ago. It was the mark of General Menephrah's house. Menephrah, the pharaoh's favored blade, a man known for triumphs in Nubia and merciless rule over the border provinces. A man who had lost his only child, the girl of his household, under mysterious circumstances 2 years prior. No one had spoken of it since, until now. "You believe she is his?" Herc asked. "We do not believe," the man said calmly. "We know. She doesn't speak, she has no mark. She did not until yesterday." Herc's breath stilled. "She said a name, just one." And before Herc could ask what name, the man finished quietly, "Yours." That word struck harder than a blow. Herc rose. "You would take her from me now?" he asked, low and hard. "She was never yours. She belongs to her blood. You will return to your estate. You will leave the girl. We will come for her when the time is right. She isn't a scroll to be fetched. She's a daughter of the general. She is a child." That word hung in the air. Heavy, sacred, it did not move. The man said nothing further, just gestured to the door. Herc left. But he did not go home immediately. Instead, he went to the scribe's quarter, deep in the southern bend of the capital's ring. There, among the old ink sellers and parchment menders, he found an old friend, Benamun, a scribe who once transcribed letters for the general's household before his hand grew too weak with age. Herc told him nothing of the visit, only asked, quietly, "Do you remember the child they lost?" Benamun's eyes shifted. "They never found the body." "I didn't ask about the body." "She was too, barely that." "Mute." "No, but quiet, watched everything, clung to her mother's leg like a shadow." "Her mother?" Benamun hesitated. "A concubine, not the wife, not official, but the general favored her, too much perhaps." "Where is she now?" "Gone, died within weeks of the child's disappearance. They said it was grief. Others said the general's wife had a hand in it." Herc nodded once and said no more. He left the capital before dawn. He rode through the night, past the markers that had once been familiar, past the old tamarisk trees where owls blinked silently, and back to the house that had gone too still in his absence. When he arrived, Nima wasn't in her corner, nor by the fountain, nor by the reed mats where she once napped. He found her outside, sitting in the same reeds where her basket had once bobbed, her feet dipped in the river, her head tilted slightly toward the stars. He didn't speak, just walked slowly and sat beside her. She didn't look at him right away. But when she did, her mouth moved again. She said nothing audible this time, just shaped the word. Herk. He felt it like a tide. He didn't ask her if she remembered anything, didn't tell her what the capital had said. He only held out his hand. She took it. But their peace didn't last. 3 days later, Kari found a mark etched into the side of the grain house, a jackal above a reed. The court had sent its warning. They were coming. The mark remained on the grain house for 2 days before Herk touched it, not to wash it off, not to scrape it away. He traced the symbol slowly, his finger brushing over the jackal's curved back, the split reed beneath its paws. The paint had already begun to flake in the desert wind, but it would not fade entirely. That was the point. It wasn't a threat. Not really. It was a statement, a declaration, a reminder that power knew where to find them. Kari watched from a distance, the boy's arms folded tight across his chest, his mouth set in a line. He didn't speak when Herk turned away, nor when the nobleman called him inside. "I want you to take her," Herk said without sitting. "Take Nima to the old water shrine by the hills. Stay 3 nights. No fire, no light, keep her hidden." Kari blinked. "You think they'll come here?" "I know they will." "What about you?" "I'll buy time." Kari frowned. "She won't want to leave you." "She'll do as you say, she trusts you." The boy looked down, unsure how to respond to that. Nima had barely let him touch her hand when Herk was near, but perhaps that would change with no choice left. Still, his voice was hesitant when he asked, "And if they come before I get her away?" "Then run," Herk said. "Take her, don't stop, don't look back." That evening, Herk packed 2 satchels with dried meat, preserved lotus roots, and small clay flasks of clean water. He placed them near Kari's bed without ceremony. Then he returned to the main hall and waited. Nima sensed the shift. She didn't speak, of course, but her silence became heavier, deliberate. Her steps were cautious again. Her gaze, which had grown open in the weeks since her rescue, now darted back to the shadows. She had not seen the mark on the wall, but somehow she knew. Herk sat beside her in the courtyard on the second night and said nothing for a long while. The stars were scattered like grain tossed across dark velvet, the moon low and slivered. A breeze danced across the reeds and tugged at the hem of Nima's tunic. She clutched it in her small fist. "You remember more than you let on," he said at last. She didn't respond. "I saw a girl once, younger than you, when I was a boy. She couldn't speak either. Not from birth, they said, but she could sing in her dreams, loud, clear, like the voice didn't belong to her." Still, Nima didn't turn her head. "When I found you in the river, I thought maybe you were like that girl, a mystery, a passing shadow. I never expected you to stay." At that, she looked at him. He smiled faintly. "And now I can't imagine this house without you." She blinked once. Her fingers reached for his hand, rested there lightly. "Kari will take you somewhere safe." Her grip tightened. "I will find you again," he promised. "But if I don't, if something keeps me, you keep going." The girl shook her head sharply. "No, not that." But he cupped her hand between his own. "Promise me." Her face twisted with something close to pain. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. And then she mouthed one word again. "Herk." He closed his eyes. "I'm right here." By morning, Kari had wrapped her in a traveling cloak and taken the north trail into the hills. Herk stood at the gate and watched them disappear beyond the tamarisk trees. They didn't come on the first day. They came on the second. 5 riders, cloaked in bone-white robes. No banners, no scrolls, but their horses bore the insignia of Menefra's command, and the man who dismounted first had the coldest eyes Herk had ever seen. He didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "You have what belongs to him." "She's gone," Herk replied evenly. The man tilted his head. "We know, we saw the trail, she's not far." "Then what do you need me for?" To remind you what happens when you keep what's not yours. The blade moved fast, a flicker, not from the cold-eyed man but from the rider behind him. A whip snapped out and struck the post beside Herc's head, not meant to hit, just to scare. It didn't work. I'm not a servant, Herc said. You won't order me like one. You're a subject of the pharaoh, that's enough. I gave her shelter, fed her, protected her. No one else did. She doesn't need protection now. She has a name. She doesn't even understand what that name means. She'll learn. Like a prisoner learns to walk in chains. The cold-eyed man stepped closer. We're not here to argue, just tell us where. No. That was it, no flourish, no anger, just a word that landed like stone. The man sighed. Then we'll find her, and when we do, you'll regret not making this easier. The riders turned. They didn't torch the house. They didn't touch a thing, but that silence was worse. Because it meant they were sure they'd win. But they had not counted on what Herc would do next. He didn't follow Kari and Nima. He rode west, straight toward the border fortress where Menefra's eldest son had last been posted. The general's household was fractured, yes, but not all in agreement. There had been rumors of dispute, of internal rivalries. Herc was gambling now, not with coin but with the thin thread of hope that someone in that broken house did not want the girl returned. He reached the fortress on the fourth day, half-starved and dust-streaked, and requested an audience with Menefra's second son, Akhusef. He didn't expect the man to grant it. But he did. Akhusef was leaner than his father, younger, his face not yet hardened into stone. He poured wine himself, no servant present, and waited until Herc had sipped. Tell me why you're here, Akhusef said. You know the girl. Better than most. I found the basket empty before anyone else. I was the one who set the first search. She was stolen. No, she was taken. By who? My mother. Herc blinked. She hated the child, knew the general's favor would grow if she lived, so she made sure the girl disappeared. You knew all this. I was 16, what could I do? Do something now. Akhusef studied him for a long moment. You care for her. She's a child. That wasn't the question. She called my name. Akhusef's gaze shifted. Where is she? Herc hesitated. If I help, I need to know, Akhusef said quietly. She's in the hills with a boy. They won't stay long. Then we need to move faster. You're willing to go against your father. I already have. I let the search fail once. I won't let him find her now. And with that, Akhusef rose. 2 hours later, the two men rode out under cover of dusk. Elsewhere, Kari had already moved Nima from the shrine to an abandoned herder's shelter halfway down the slope. He kept the fires low and foraged when he could, teaching Nima to chew dry cactus for water. She followed without complaint, but her eyes grew duller by the day. He knew she was waiting for Herc, and each night when he didn't come, part of her dimmed. But on the 6th night she stirred suddenly at dusk. She sat up straight, eyes locked on the path. Then she whispered a sound. It was barely audible. But it was a word. Herc. By the time Herc and Akhusef reached the foothills, the desert light had begun to shift into that strange hour where everything turned gold and silent. The shadows grew long and the air trembled with heat remnants trapped beneath sand. Neither man spoke much during the ride, but something between them had begun to settle, an unspoken understanding. One born not of friendship but necessity. They were both risking something vital. For Herc, it was Nima. For Akhusef, it was far more complex. It was defiance against blood, against hierarchy, against the very shape of his life carved by his father's expectations. We'll approach from the west ridge, Akhusef murmured as they dismounted. The paths there are narrow and easier to defend. Herc nodded. If they've found her, she'll have run. She knows how to hide. She's a child. She's not just a child. That statement hung between them as they climbed, winding through stone and twisted scrub, hearts heavy with what might await. At a ridge just above the herder's hut, Herc froze. Smoke. Thin. Barely more than a whisper, but real. He motioned for Akusef to wait. Then, with practiced steps, he descended toward the shelter. Inside, Kari crouched beside Nima, who hadn't moved in hours. Her eyes had closed, not in sleep, but something closer to surrender. The little girl's breath was shallow. Her lips were dry and cracked. The water had run out that morning, and the last of the cactus had turned bitter. "Please," Kari whispered, brushing a hand over her forehead. "Please don't stop now." He didn't hear the approach, but he felt it. When the door creaked open, Kari reached for the blade Herc had given him. But it was Herc himself who stepped inside, shoulders taut, eyes sweeping the dim room. She stirred. Nima's head turned slightly, and for a second her eyes opened, not wide, not fully, but enough to see. And she smiled. She smiled. Herc dropped to his knees at her side, hands cradling her face as gently as he could manage. "I'm here," he whispered, throat raw. The girl tried to speak again, but nothing came. Her lips moved in a shape familiar only to him. "His name." Again. He pressed his forehead to hers, the pain of it cracking him open from the inside out. Akusef entered behind him, quiet and grim. One look was all he needed. "She needs water, salt, something for the heat sickness. There's a stream just beyond the ridge." Kari bolted without hesitation. "She waited for you," Herc murmured. Akusef knelt beside them. "She's strong, but she doesn't have long. I should have come sooner." "You came, that's enough." But it was. Not for Herc. When Kari returned with the skin soaked in cool water, they let a few drops pass her lips. Her throat worked, slow, painful, but she swallowed. Again, then again. She didn't speak, but she blinked once, twice. She was still there. Night fell quickly in the hills. Herc kept Nima wrapped in his cloak, her body nestled against his chest. Kari curled nearby, exhaustion written across every line of his face. Akusef stood watch at the door, his hand never far from the hilt of his blade. "They'll come at sunrise," he said quietly. Herc didn't ask how he knew, he believed him. "I can hold them off," Akusef added, "but only if you're gone before then. She's not strong enough to travel." "Then we move her anyway. Better half a day carried on your back than a lifetime in their hands." The choice wasn't really a choice. Before first light, they bundled what little they could carry, and Akusef led them down the back path of the ridge, toward the river basin beyond. Herc bore Nima like he had that first day, wrapped tightly against his chest. Her breath was stronger now. Her fingers occasionally twitched, but still no sound. Kari carried the packs. Every few minutes he turned to glance at Herc, eyes searching the girl's still form. They were halfway down the basin's dry ledge when Akusef stopped short. He dropped to one knee, studying the stone. Herc shifted Nima slightly and approached. "What is it?" "They're ahead of us." "How do you?" Akusef pointed. "Fresh tracks, 4 riders. They passed this way no more than 2 hours ago. They took the bend south, thinking you went for the lower caves." Kari's face went pale. "What do we do?" Akusef's voice was calm, deliberate. "We split." "No," Herc began. "I'll draw them, take my horse, circle back east, stay off the open path." "They'll kill you." "Then let them try." He removed the sash from his robe, handed it to Herc. "They know this color, they'll follow." Herc's throat worked, but no words came. Akusef smiled faintly. "You're not the only one who wants to break something open. Go." And with that he turned and vanished down the slope, riding hard in the wrong direction, toward danger, toward his father's wrath, toward toward a confrontation long delayed. Herc didn't waste time. He shifted Nima again, whistled low, and led Kari through the olive grove that marked the old boundary between royal lands and the workers' quarters. No one guarded that route. No one ever expected fugitives to come from above. They passed through dry reeds and fallen stone walls, the signs of settlements lost to sand and time. Kari stumbled once, catching himself on a broken pillar. "How much farther?" he whispered. Herc pointed. "There, the shrine of Mad." The old shrine lay in a crescent of cliff, shaded by overhanging rock and crumbling statues of the goddess of truth. It hadn't been used in years, not since the last priestess passed, but the stone was still cool and the well beneath still clear. They laid Nima beneath the oldest of the carvings, where water trickled from a crack in the wall. Kari knelt beside her and cupped a few drops to her lips. Herc rested a hand on her chest, feeling the soft rhythm of breath. "I'll keep watch," Kari said. "You rest." But Herc shook his head. "I'm not sleeping again until this ends." Neither did. They stayed in the shrine for 2 days, waiting for sign of Akusef's fate. It came in the form of a lone traveler, a merchant on his way to Thebes. He carried news like sand in his cloak, accidental, plentiful, half-true. "A nobleman tried to kill the general," the man said, eyes wide. "Said the boy was mad, mad but brave. Shamed his own father before the guards struck him down." "Did he die?" Kari asked, voice shaking. The merchant shrugged. "I don't know. They say he was carried off. Could be prison, could be worse." When he left, silence fell again. Until Nima stirred. She sat upright slowly, blinked at the carved wings of Mad above her. Then she looked at Herc. Her mouth opened. No whisper. No mouthing of his name. She spoke. "Why did you come?" The words were fragile, dry as papyrus, but clear. Herc froze. Kari stared. The girl's lips trembled. "You could have left. Why didn't you?" Herc took her hand. "Because you're mine to protect," he said simply, "and you always will be." Nima's voice had been faint, no louder than a leaf brushing across sandstone, but to Herc it struck like thunder. After all the days of silence, of stillness, of wondering whether her spirit had been damaged beyond repair, the sound of her question undid him more than any sob ever could. He didn't cry, not then, but his grip around her hand tightened with something that hovered just beneath breaking. Kari knelt beside them, his lips parted as if he were afraid even breathing would frighten her voice back into silence. But Nima was not afraid, not anymore. She blinked slowly, gathering her thoughts like water pulled from a shallow spring. "I remember the river," she whispered. "I remember hands pulling me under." Herc closed his eyes for a moment. "That was weeks ago." "It still feels like it just happened." Her voice cracked then and she coughed. Kari rushed to get more water from the shrine's trickle and returned, cupping it gently to her lips. This time she drank deeply, and when she exhaled it was stronger. "I heard you calling me," she said. Herc looked down at her. "You mean just now?" "No," she said. "When I was gone, your voice, I followed it." He didn't understand it, but he didn't question it either. There was something sacred in her recovery, in the way she had come back to herself. Whether it was his voice or the goddess Mad herself that had called her through the darkness, he didn't need to know. All that mattered was that she was here, breathing, alive. The sun filtered through the cracks in the shrine's high stone walls, and the light fell like strands of gold across her skin. For the first time since she'd been pulled from the Nile, her eyes no longer looked haunted. But safety was not theirs yet. At dusk they heard voices. Not shouts, not commands, just the low murmur of men speaking in cautious tones, and the slow crunch of footsteps on brittle ground. Herc reached for the staff he'd carved from a broken cypress branch, and motioned for Kari to take Nima deeper behind the shrine's altar. There was nowhere to run. If the voices belonged to General Shafik's men, There would be no arguing, no pleading. They would take the girl, and both Herc and Kari would be branded traitors if they were lucky enough to die quickly. But as the figures came into view, Herc's breath caught. There were two of them, not soldiers, not guards. Priests. One old, one younger, both clad in faded linen robes bearing the faded feather emblem of Mad. The elder leaned heavily on a cane, his posture bent with age, but his eyes, oh, his eyes, were sharp. "You've disturbed a sacred shrine," the elder said without anger, only certainty. Herc stood his ground. "We meant no harm, only refuge." The old priest stepped forward slowly. "This place has not been occupied since the passing of High Priestess Eseta, but the stones remember the faithful. They whisper when one returns in need." Kari emerged from behind the altar, helping Nima walk. She stood on trembling legs, one arm hooked around Kari's neck, the other pressed to her chest. The old priest's gaze softened when it landed on her. "That child," he murmured, "she carries more than she knows." The younger priest stepped forward. "We heard talk of a girl pulled from the Nile, of a nobleman's son who turned against his father, of a former boatman turned heretic. I see now that the stories were incomplete." "She hasn't done anything wrong," Herc said quickly. "She didn't steal or lie or harm anyone." The elder priest held up a hand. "She doesn't need to have. The gods weigh more than actions. They weigh hearts." Silence fell. Then the old man exhaled. "Come, we'll not hand you over, but we must move quickly." They led them through a hidden path behind the shrine carved ages ago by monks seeking quiet from the world's noise. The path led into a cleft between two cliffs, where vines grew thick and the sun barely reached. There, nestled beneath stone and ivy, was a structure Herc hadn't expected, a small temple half-collapsed but standing, and in its shadow a door carved into the cliffside itself. "A passage to the necropolis," the younger priest explained. "Used by those who cared for the resting places of scribes and priests. It is forgotten by most, but not by us." Herc looked down at Nima. Her eyes were wide but not afraid. "Will it be safe?" The elder priest smiled faintly. "Safe. No place is truly safe when power has been insulted, but hidden, yes." They descended through the tunnel, lit only by the priest's small clay lamp, the walls marked by ancient names and faint offerings left in niches of stone. Nima touched each one as they passed, pausing now and then, as if something deep within her stirred with every brush of her fingers. "She sees things," the younger priest said under his breath. "I think she always has." At last they reached a chamber at the tunnel's end, a room carved with care, with a platform for rest and an urn of water drawn from deep underground. The elder priest sat heavily on the stone ledge and sighed. "You must understand," he said slowly, "the child is not simply a girl who wandered too close to power. There is more here, much more." Herc felt the weight of it. He had felt it since the Nile, since the moment she opened her mouth and said only his name. "She will be hunted until that power is broken, or until someone stronger stands in its way," the elder priest continued. "There is a path forward, but it will cost you." "Whatever it is," Herc said, "I'll pay it." The priest's eyes narrowed. "It may cost your name, your freedom, even your life." Herc didn't flinch. "Then so be it." That night Nima slept deeply for the first time since she was taken. Herc sat beside her, Kari keeping guard at the tunnel entrance, and the priests whispered among themselves in another chamber. The quiet was heavy, but not unbearable. It felt like the kind of silence that came before something important. At dawn, the younger priest returned with something wrapped in linen. He handed it to Herc. "Clothing of a temple novice," he said. "It will help her pass unnoticed if she's seen. And this," he drew out a carved emblem of Mad, small enough to fit in a child's palm, "was found beneath the altar the day you arrived. We believe it was left for her." Herc stared at it. The carving was simple, but when Nima awoke and took it in her hand, she smiled again. This was mine, she said. Before, Kari asked gently. She shook her head, always. There was no arguing with her certainty. They made plans then. The priests would send word to allies beyond the capital, scribes, midwives, even healers who owed no loyalty to the general. In time, they said, the winds would change, but not yet. And in the days that followed, Herc began to teach Nima again. Not letters or scrolls, but silence and survival. How to sense danger in a shift of air, how to read footsteps by sound alone, how to disappear behind stone and shadow when men came near. Kari joined them, eager to learn. They became three again, not just fugitives, but something more, something like family. Still, news filtered in. Akusef had survived. He was imprisoned but not executed. The general, too proud to kill his own blood publicly, had confined him to the mountain fortresses, out of sight, out of mind. But word spread of his defiance, and it had stirred unrest among the soldiers. Quiet murmurs, questions. And one day, a message arrived, smuggled in a jar of honeyed figs. It was only a scrap of parchment, 3 words in Akusef's hand. Keep her safe. Nima read it herself. Then, for the first time, she turned to Herc and said, I want to go back. His heart thudded, back to the palace. To him, she said, to Akusef. Kari's face twisted. They'll never let us near. Then we don't ask, she said. And in that moment, Herc saw something new in her. Not just the lost girl from the river, not just the survivor from the shrine, but someone becoming more than either. Someone who might change everything. They waited until the 3rd moon. It was the priests who insisted, not out of fear but wisdom. The city swelled with spies during the Festival of Plenty, too many eyes, too many mouths that fed off secrets. But after the festival passed and the crowds thinned, the guards relaxed into the haze of drink and heat. That was when the passage opened. Kari had slipped into the city twice before the plan was made. He studied the guards' rotations at the northern barracks, noted the shift in garrison leadership since the general's paranoia had turned inward. Men who once watched over temple relics now policed the alleys, but most of them were tired, disillusioned. Few had ever seen Akusef in person. Fewer still knew why he had vanished from the capital's heart. Herc sat cross-legged beside the tunnel's exit, his fingers tracing the ridge of his staff while Nima watched him in silence. She no longer needed to be coaxed to eat or reminded to sleep. Her eyes missed nothing now. When she moved, it was with quiet purpose. She still didn't speak often, but when she did, it came with clarity and sometimes unsettling certainty. He won't last long in the fortress, she said suddenly. Kari looked up. You've never seen it. I don't need to. Her voice held no challenge, only truth. The priests gave them 3 things for the journey. 2 cloaks dyed the color of dry earth, a copper seal once used by a forgotten scribe of the high court, and a blessing, scrawled on old papyrus, folded and tucked into Nima's sash. They left before dawn, traveling by side paths and shallow gullies, avoiding open roads. Kari led them across the dry ridge where old shepherds' trails wound through the hills. By midday they reached the cliff's edge, where the land sloped sharply toward the river valley. Below them, dust and stone shimmered in the heat, and far in the distance, the black silhouette of the fortress clung to the mountain's shoulder like a scar that never faded. Herc took the lead after that. It had been years since he'd walked that road, but the memory lived deep, woven through muscle and instinct. He knew the soft whistle of the wind where the cliffs narrowed, the place where a fig tree grew sideways out of a crack in the stone, the trickle of water that pooled beside the broken columns of a ruined watchpost. Every part of the journey whispered pieces of who he once was, not just Pharaoh's boatman, not just the man who ferried words between thrones, but someone who remembered what it meant to carry people when they could no longer walk themselves. They reached the outer edge of the fortress as the sun began to fall. The western wall, though tall and blackened by centuries of wind, had begun to crumble where the stone had loosened in the last rains. Kari was the first to find the seam between blocks where children once climbed to leave messages for imprisoned brothers. He widened it with care, just enough for Nima to slip through. Inside the fortress, the corridors ran like veins through a body that had long since forgotten how to feel. Dust coated everything, thick, gray, undisturbed. No guards inside, only outside. The general had buried his son deep, far from view. "He's 3 levels down," Herc whispered, his voice nearly lost in the stone. "When I was a servant here, I heard it called the Hollow Cell. No light, just echoes." Nima didn't hesitate. She moved ahead of them, feet soft on stone, her fingers grazing the walls like they were a map written in silence. At every corner she paused, not because she didn't know the way, but as if she were listening to something the others couldn't hear. They found the door after 27 turns and 4 descents. It was thick, bronze-edged, reinforced by iron rivets. No keyhole, no handle. A prison built not just to contain, but to erase. "He's behind that?" Kari asked, breathless. Nima didn't answer. She stepped forward, placed her hand flat against the metal. Her lips moved in a whisper no one could hear. And then she knocked. 3 times softly. And then again, louder. A beat passed, then 2 more. Then from the other side a sound, faint, hollow, impossible. A knock in return. Kari's hands flew to his mouth. Herc stepped forward, his palm flat beside hers. "Akusef," he called softly. Silence. Then again a whisper behind the door, this time a voice. "Who's there?" Nima pressed her forehead to the cold bronze. "It's me." He didn't reply. She stepped back. "He doesn't believe." "Then we make him believe," Herc said. He turned to Kari. "The upper corridor, go now. Look for the rusted winch on the northwest tower. If you find it, turn it counterclockwise until it won't move." Kari didn't hesitate. He vanished into the tunnel like a breath exhaled. Nima waited with her eyes closed, fingers twitching. Minutes passed, then a tremble beneath their feet. A soft groan as gears, unmoved for years, creaked to life. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin trails. The door shifted, metal scraped, then it opened. Not fully, just a hand's width. But it was enough. The figure inside stumbled into the light, blinking like a man returned from the dead. He was gaunt, face hollowed by weeks without sun, but his eyes were the same, dark, wide, searching. "Nima," he said. She stepped forward without a word and wrapped her arms around him. And Akusef fell to his knees. They had only seconds. Herc pulled them both to their feet. "The corridor behind us is clear, but not for long." Akusef nodded. "I know another way, a smuggler's path used by thieves." He led them through a crack in the wall beside the cell, a gap none of them would have noticed, except Akusef had memorized every inch of his prison. The passage was narrow and dark, but it curved upward, then out toward the mountainside. By the time they emerged, the wind had changed. Below them, horns sounded. "They found the open cell," Herc said. "No," Nima whispered. "They found Kari." Akusef turned. "Where is he?" He didn't wait for an answer. He ran. They reached the edge of the fortress wall just as 2 guards dragged Kari back through the crumbling gate. His cloak was torn, but he fought like a jackal, limbs flailing, teeth bared. Herc lunged forward. "There's no time." "We don't leave him," Akusef snapped. "But if we're caught?" Nima's voice cut through. "They're not watching the north slope. That's where we go." "How do you?" "Trust me," she said. They crept along the edge, looping wide around the walls until they reached a rise above the gate. From there, they saw the courtyard below, lit by torches, full of guards, and in the center, Kari on his knees. General Haimnep stepped forward from the shadows, robed in crimson, a blade in one hand. "Do you think you can free a traitor?" he sneered. and live to see sunrise. Kari spat at his feet. Hamnep raised the blade. And that's when the wind howled. Not a desert wind, not the breeze of dry heat or shifting dunes. This wind came with force, with purpose. The torches snuffed, sand kicked into the air, horses screamed. And in the chaos, Nima stood at the edge of the wall, arms raised, hair twisting like a flame. She's calling it, Akusef said, eyes wide. She's calling the storm. Herc grabbed him, now while they're blind. They slid down the ridge as sand swallowed the courtyard below. The wind turned the world to dust, and in that storm no man could see another's face. The girl in white vanished like mist. Hamnep screamed something, but his words were lost. They found Kari moments later, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Together the four of them fled. By morning the fortress was empty. Not of men, but of certainty. Guards whispered of curses, of winds that obeyed a girl's hand, of bronze doors that opened to knocks from ghosts. And far from the city, beneath the twisted roots of the fig tree near the river's bend, Herc buried something in silence, the copper seal the priests had given them. Their time hiding was done. It was time to bring the truth into light. Nima stood over the river that morning, watching the water curl around the stones. Akusef, she said, your father will not stop. He stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Then neither will we. The sun rose slowly, and with it the beginning of something new. The road to Thebes was long, dry, and unkind, but they did not travel it alone. Word had already begun to move ahead of them, passed not by scribes or royal decrees, but by whispers at wellsprings, by mothers with calloused hands and scarred backs, by old men who remembered the son of General Hamnep before he vanished into silence. And now, those same voices murmured of a mute girl who stood in a dust storm and did not blink, of a forgotten prisoner who returned from the dead, and of a boatman who walked with the stride of a man who had ferried more than oars in his life. In the hills before the gates of Thebes, the group paused. Akusef stood quietly between Kari and Herc, while Nima crouched by a patch of wild reeds growing beside a cracked stone marker. She did not speak. She rarely did now, but she watched the wind as if it whispered things to her the others could not hear. Kari adjusted the linen wrap over his bruised ribs. You sure they'll even let us through those gates? No, Herc said, his voice flat. But we're not here to sneak through, we're here to be seen. Akusef turned to Nima. This is your choice, you've led us this far. She didn't respond for a long time, then finally she stood. He's already watching, she said. They descended the ridge just as the sun hit its peak. The gates of Thebes loomed ahead, guarded but open. Trade caravans flowed in and out, chariots creaked under baskets of wheat and clay jars of oil, while scribes waved orders and soldiers stood idle. No one gave the four travelers more than a glance, until Akusef stepped forward into the shadow of the great pillars. A pair of guards stiffened. Halt, one barked, raising a staff. State your purpose. I am Akusef, son of Hamnep, he said without flinching. I was wrongly imprisoned. The guard blinked, uncertain. The name was familiar, feared. That's not possible. Tell that to my father. Whispers rippled fast. By the time they reached the inner court, dozens had gathered. Some stepped aside in awe, others simply stared. The palace was not what it once had been. Power had consolidated under fear, not wisdom. General Hamnep had filled the spaces once meant for counsel with soldiers loyal only to him. The pharaoh, old and tired, no longer heard every petition himself. But today would be different. Word reached the palace scribe by midday. A former prisoner, claiming noble blood, demanding audience. Normally such claims were dismissed, but it wasn't the name Akusef that stirred something in the scribe's bones. It was the girl beside him. He had heard of her. So had others. By sunset they were summoned. The throne room had changed. Gone were the soft rugs and open windows that once let sunlight pour in. Now it stood darkened, banners stitched in blood red hanging from the columns, and at the far end, slouched upon the carved throne, sat Pharaoh Setepra. His face was drawn with age, his back hunched slightly as he leaned on one armrest, but his eyes were sharp still. To his left stood Hamnep, proud, steady, and when Akhusef entered, the general did not flinch. He only tilted his chin as though mildly amused. So the pharaoh rasped, "A ghost comes walking." Akhusef bowed, but not low. "I come to clear my name." "There are records," Hamnep interrupted. "He confessed to sedition, to theft of state scrolls." "I did not confess," Akhusef said, voice rising. "My words were twisted, my scribes silenced." "And yet you come back to accuse your own father?" the pharaoh asked. "That is a dangerous thing." Akhusef stepped aside. "I do not come alone." Nima stepped forward. The court leaned in. "This girl," Hamnep snapped, "is nothing. She is mute, or was, whatever trick she." "She speaks when she wishes," Akhusef said. And Nima did. Her voice rang like a bronze bowl struck by steady hands. "I was left in a basket. I was not meant to live, but I did, and I saw what others did not." She held up a papyrus scroll, one she had never shown before, not to Akhusef, not to Herc. It had been hidden beneath her robe since the night of the storm. The pharaoh raised a hand. A servant rushed to take it, unrolling the brittle parchment before his eyes. It was the decree of imprisonment, but not in the pharaoh's hand, not in the hand of any of the 3 senior scribes. It bore only one signature. Hamnep. No witnesses, no countersign. Akhusef stepped forward again. "I was not tried, I was not heard, I was buried." The pharaoh did not blink. "Do you have anything else?" Nima reached for her sash and pulled free the crumpled note that had been placed in her basket all those years ago. It was faded, smudged, but the last line was still visible. "His name is hers. Her only word was mine." And beneath it a mark. A general's seal. The court went still. For the first time, Hamnep paled. "That paper means nothing," he began, stepping forward. The pharaoh's hand lifted sharply. "No child should bear witness against her own blood," Setepra said slowly, "unless the blood denies her." He turned to Hamnep. "This girl, do you deny she is yours?" Hamnep's jaw worked, but no sound came. Nima walked forward, past the guards, past the startled servants. She did not look at Hamnep, she did not even glance at the throne. She walked until she stood before Akhusef. Then she touched his hand and her lips parted. "Akhusef," she said, "you are my brother." The chamber gasped. Akhusef's knees nearly gave. The pharaoh leaned back, his face unreadable. "I have heard enough," he said. In the days that followed, the court reeled. Hamnep was placed under watch. An inquiry was launched. His power waned quickly, stripped by the same hands that once obeyed him blindly. Without the pharaoh's backing, his voice became a whisper lost in a room of thunder. But that was not the end. The real ending came quietly 3 weeks later when a new scribe was named to oversee the archives. His name was Akhusef. He took the position not for glory but for restoration. His first act was to rewrite the record of the prisoners kept in the fortress beyond the river. Each name, each sentence, each silence. The second act was more personal. In the evening, just as the sun turned the walls golden, Akhusef brought a basket into the scribe's chamber. Inside it were reeds, a fresh papyrus roll, and a carved ink pot. At the center sat Nima, watching, listening. Not as a mystery, but as a girl with a name. And a family. Herc returned to the river village, not as a boatman, but as a man who had ferried someone toward something worth staying for. He did not speak of the court. He did not write of the storm. But every month a letter came from Thebes. Each one signed in 2 hands. Akhuzef and Nema, and for the first time in years, both names carried weight. Not because of the general, but despite him.